Well, welcome everybody to a new episode of the Premier Living Podcast. I have a very special guest with us today. This is Dr. Olga Stevko. She is a classically trained MD who has developed a methodology and a technique that is truly revolutionizing health potential. And on today's episode, we'll be talking about the missing link of longevity, how genetic traumatic imprints could actually be factoring in to the lifestyle equation of health. And so Dr. Stevko will be sharing her methodology and sharing what genetic imprints really mean. And so if you're in clinical practice, you're looking to really uncover the layers of health, I believe this will be a very exciting topic and really touching on the new frontier of health potential by going into the subconscious and really more so the genetic patterning that can happen through traumatic experiences that we have not in our life, but in the lives preceding us in our ancestors and beyond. And so, welcome, Dr. Stevko, to our Premier Living Podcast. I want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, William.
I think it's really important to say that, when you're working with that subconscious, it can dramatically change every moment of every life, right? And, keep in mind that the genetic imprints that we're kind of talking about, they can be kind of the back underlying kind of, I guess, coding potential. Is that the word that you like to kind of analogize? Or what's a really good analogy for what these genetic imprints are?
Genetic imprint refers to epigenetic changes in a person's genes following trauma. And these epigenetic changes can be passed down to offspring. And how imprint is happening, it's my understanding. It's during the imprint, it's an instant sensory and cognitive assessment and learning about the environment and also responding to it in order to survive or adapt. And this imprint can be passed down to offspring.
And why is it important that, when we're talking about longevity, that we start to understand how these genetic traumatic imprints are impacting us, or if they're even present? Like, why is that actually important to maybe conceptualize that in a clinical practice or working with patients beyond?
It's a lot of evidence now. There are some scientific experiments that shows that these genetic trauma imprints, they can lead to anxiety, PTSD, depression. And if you would like, I will talk about a couple of scientific experiments.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Dr. Brian Dias and Kerry Russell, they did an experiment with male mice. And during this experiment, they introduced mild shock, electric shock to mice food, and at the same time they introduce the odor. It's a chemical that is similar to cherry blossom smell. And what they saw, that mice created a fear response to that mild shock, and this response was passed down to their offspring and even to their grandchildren. And their offspring and their grandchildren, they never experience an electric shock and also the smell of cherry blossom. And when the smell of cherry blossom was introduced to offspring and also their grandchildren, they showed the same amount of fear response that their parents did. And it shows a mechanism of transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. And there are some mechanisms that show it. And scientists showed it's a histone modification, and also an scientific experiment of Dr. Odit Rehavi showed that this inherited information is passing through small RNA molecules. And Dr. Odit Rehavi did experiment with worms. They called C. elegans worms. And Dr. Odit Rehavi showed that acquired traits like learned behaviors and stress response can be passed down to the next generations. And how it works, it's a very, I was so fascinated about this, I wanted to know more. And during the traumatic or extremely stressful experience, that person's body, or in this case, one's body, is creating RNA, the nervous system. It creates these small RNA molecules, and the information, inherited information, is stored in these small RNA molecules. And after these molecules from soma, body, they go to germ line that creates sperm and egg, and these small RNA molecules, they will be in a sperm egg, and offspring, their neurons, like first of all, these molecules will be transported to the neurons, and neurons will be reading this information when something remains the same, whatever was happening in the environment. For example, for mice, it was smell, but for worms, Dr. Rehavi did an experiment for starvation and also for higher temperature and viruses.
Wow. And so, I think it's probably important to discuss that, the body might misconstrue a signal, right? Maybe there's a similar scent to cherry blossom, but it's not exactly like cherry blossom. But, do you believe that could still stimulate that same genetic trauma or traumatic imprint, in your opinion? Is that something that, the body could misconstrue the signal, and there's this kind of programming and that imprint gets triggered in the body? Is that possible, you think?
William, I was thinking about this, what you asked, because what I saw working with my clients, because worms and mice are more kind of a primitive animals, and humans are very well developed, more complex. And I'm not sure for animals. Actually, I'm thinking about an example. I heard that sometimes animals, for example, my friend told about her dog. When her dog saw some, what is it called, like a rubber pipe, a hose, and it reminded kind of a shape of a snake. And her dog was terrified, especially when that hose was moving. It means there were imprints related to a snake, but even it was not a snake, that hose wasn't a snake, it reminded a snake. To dog. And what I saw, like again, in my clients' experiences, actually, I have a very good example. As a client, I had I believe he was 9 or 10 years old boy, and he had a horrible fear of darkness. And when he was left alone in the room, he could not sleep. And also when he experienced some sounds. And I asked him what kind of sounds made him fearful. And he told kind of movements of the branches of the trees against the window. It produced certain familiar sounds to him. And I asked him, what do they remind you? And to my very big surprise, he told bullets. And when I talked to his mother, I wanted just to know more information. She told that her husband is a war veteran and experienced truly horrible traumatic experiences. And in their family, it was not even allowed to watch movies about any kind of wars. That boy never experienced bullets before. It means it was a genetic trauma imprints of his father. And it's very interesting when we worked on these unconscious programs that was created by these imprints. All of his fears of darkness, of the sounds were gone. And he was not afraid anymore of a darkness or the sounds.
So in a sense, the fear of darkness and the sounds was coming from his father's experience in war that passed through the sperm cell. And basically when he was conceived, that imprint was now being triggered anytime there was a darkness or sound or anything like that, essentially.
And it's what you ask me, are these precise triggers? For example, smell of cherry blossom for mice that took part in that experiment. Probably it was precise. For human, it can be even what reminds that, for example, sounds or smells or something else.
Makes total sense.
Even sometimes what I experience, it can be not specific or that reminds kind of senses, that it can be even what's happening in life that was similar to the traumatic experiences of ancestors.
Makes total sense. And in your experience, obviously here at Premier Research Labs, we work a lot with nutrition. What's the benefit of, working with these genetic traumatic imprints, understanding them, and perhaps maybe seeing better or changes in how the body processes nutrients, right? I think there's a whole world and kind of discussion we could have on how the body may change metabolically based on how it's actually, working with or working against these imprints, for example. Is that true? Is that something that you've seen with clients?
I believe that there are powerful techniques to cope with stress, whatever triggers that stress reaction. And I believe supplements too that can create more kind of resilience and better coping strategies with stress. And I believe some of them can create even neuroplasticity.
Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways, though, to optimize the efficiency of the body, would you argue that, at the core, there's an element of maybe addressing or assessing how these genetic traumatic imprints are affecting the body? Is that something that you would agree with?
Actually, I believe this method, assessing this whatever, because genetic trauma imprints, they're becoming unconscious programs. And these unconscious programs will affect many areas of life. The neuroscience research shows that 95% of our life experience are shaped by unconscious programs. And I believe to the most efficient way and fastest way and permanent way is to identify these unconscious programs and genetic trauma imprints that created these issues, and work on that level, resolving those, and as a result, even patterns can be changed of thinking, emotional patterns, behavioral patterns, and reacting. This can be changed. And how people or animals even perceive the reality can be changed.
That's amazing. And it's all because it's working with the subconscious layers, right? It's essentially, and maybe for even the audience, would you be able to better define the conscious and the subconscious? I think some people, might not necessarily understand, that terminology. Hopefully a lot of our listeners do, but, what is the subconscious mind and what is the conscious mind? And then talk to us a little bit, I know we've kind of demonstrated that, but how, again, those genetic traumatic imprints, they bubble up to the surface in the subconscious or the conscious mind.
I did not find the best definition of the unconscious mind. And I believe that the term unconscious mind and subconscious mind, they are the same. Only different psychologists and psychiatrists use either or both. And the unconscious mind is connected to the nervous system. And it takes part mostly in autonomic nervous system. And I believe the unconscious mind takes part in creating the imprints.
Okay. So would you say it's an active participant in that, or is it more along for the ride of creating those genetic traumatic imprints?
I believe the unconscious mind is an active participant, and I will explain why. Our unconscious mind and our unconscious programs, they influence our perception of ourselves, of other people, and the world around. And perception mostly is unconscious. Perception is the entire process of making us a sense of the world and assessing the world. And its senses are involved, sensory assessment, and also cognitive assessment. And I believe that genetic trauma imprints, they affect perception dramatically. And an anthropologist, Gregory Bateson, he created the quote, "The map is not the territory." And he referred the territory, it's unfiltered reality. And the map is our perception, is our mental states during the perception of unfiltered reality. And we perceive things not how they are. We perceive things how we are. Pretty much we create our own reality. That's why perception is linked to acute stress and chronic stress. And we can talk about that at some point during our podcast.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's actually just jump into that because, when we're talking about longevity, I think a lot of the conversation, especially in today's society and, what a lot of clinicians are focused on is stress management. And this is something that, we here at Premier Research Labs, we have a lot of different products that can help the body from a physiological standpoint, maybe buffer better handle stress, right? But I think too, in the discussion around stress, we do have to talk about the conscious framing of kind of the experience that we have, and also the subconscious kind of constraints or, factors that may be preventing kind of a opening or a dilation or a welcoming of some stress, because life is stressful, right? It's kind of one of those things where you can't avoid stress. But, I think I don't hear, since we met, you were the only person that I've ever talked to that really talks about these genetic traumatic imprints. And I think, there's epigenetic factors, and, I've read research on famine and how that famine in a sense is like a genetic traumatic imprint, right? It kind of comes through the lineage. But a lot of people, a lot of clinicians aren't necessarily talking about that. They're not evaluating that. Because, that's a level of, if the body's in a hyper-reactive state, right? It's overstressed. Yes, we can talk about lifestyle. We can talk about the foods. We can talk about mindsets and beliefs, but there's also that subconscious layer. So would you be willing to kind of help people better understand the importance and the relevancy of these genetic traumatic imprints to just stress management itself?
Yes, and perception has to do a lot with creating stress. And William, as you said, people are experiencing a lot of stress triggers. And it's not only about triggers that create stress. It's how we perceive these triggers. And I will give you one example. One of my clients told me a story. He was having lunch with some of his friends outside. And all of them, they saw a rattlesnake that was located, somehow it was near their table. And it's so interesting. The stress trigger was there. It was the same snake. How everybody reacted was completely different. Some people were neutral. Some people were curious and excited. Some very fearful. And each of them, they come up with a solution. People who were fearful, they suggested maybe it's a good idea to kill that snake. And some people who were curious, they wanted to observe and admire that snake. And does it make sense, William, that it can be the same situation, the same trigger or triggers that can be stressful can create stress reaction to some people or neutral for others? And because it's how people perceive the trigger.
That's true. And do you believe the importance is, to help people have more space around triggers to make a healthier decision on how they respond to that stress? I mean, as you kind of, work in this world of genetic traumatic imprints, and we go into perception and conscious and subconscious framing, what's the intention, right, of working with all of that when there is that, because there will always be a rattlesnake in life, right? We can't avoid them. Yep. So what's the goal in your opinion?
It's the reaction, like first reaction, it's mostly unconscious. And people in a fearful state, it creates flight or fight or freeze responses. And even some people prepare themselves during similar situations to react differently. And they do it on their conscious level. Often it does not work because these unconscious programs that create that fear or anxiety will override conscious response. And I observed and I believe why people react so differently to the same trigger, because they are genetic trauma imprints, and also they can be womb trauma imprints and childhood trauma imprints, so all the above. And it's because of that triggers are becoming like in that experiment with mice and cherry blossom. Cherry blossom smell became a trigger for offspring and even the grandchildren. And the same for human being. There can be certain sounds, certain smells, even motion, even what they see visually that is a snake or reminds them a snake, can trigger this inherited memory in these small RNA molecules to be experienced. How neurons are reading this information, and also brain response and entire body. And because of these genetic trauma imprints and unconscious programs they create, people have different reactions, different behaviors, different emotions during the same triggers.
Makes total sense. Would you be willing to, I know you've had wonderful client testimonials and journeys with clients, because I would assume most clients that you're working with and you're using this methodology with, they're coming to you because of a very specific, maybe there's a wall that they're encountering in their career. Maybe there is they're cognitively aware of an emotional trauma. Maybe they're looking to achieve something in life and they feel like they can't. I mean, I don't want to speak to all the reasons why, but would you be willing to share some stories of, talking about the rattlesnake and just, how clients have changed as they become aware of these genetic traumatic imprints?
The change can be dramatic, working on the unconscious programs and genetic trauma imprints and different kind of imprints, womb and early childhood, because you go to really the root cause of the issue. And these unconscious programs can go to different areas of life, because they affect even cognition and thoughts and emotions and behaviors and reactions, and can affect relationships, can affect health, mental, emotional, physical, can affect how you are with people, and it's related to relationships, personal and in business, and even how you are in business, because it's the way how you look at things and how you are related to people and more. And it's so interesting because our podcast is about longevity, and some people think anti-aging and longevity is the same, and they are related and they are different. Longevity refers to living beyond their life expectancy, and anti-aging refers to reversing or preventing the process of aging. And it's so interesting. I worked with so many people and they had completely different issues, and most of them, when they work on some of the issues, they experience their reversing of their age significantly. And it was how they looked, and their cognition, memory, balance. And as one example, I had a client, and I have the video of our webinar because we talked about that. And Lou, it's on my website if somebody would like to watch it. And I believe he was 67 when he came to me. And he shared that he did not have good cognition, good memory, and was tired, and he looked very unhealthy, and he had triple bags under his eyes, deep wrinkles, unhealthy color of his skin in face. And only after 4 sessions, and it was maybe 90 days since our first session, he changed dramatically. His deep wrinkles were gone. Eye bags became much, much smaller. They diminished. And his memory improved significantly. His cognition and his sleep, his energy, so many things improved. And it's so interesting that he experienced dramatic shifts in many areas of his life. He was very insecure about people, could not connect on a deep level. And after this work, he could connect easily and talked easily to people and enjoyed it very much. And I had one client, I was like astonished what happened. He had cardiovascular issues and was overweight, and he was over 60. And he came to me for help because of being overweight. And as a result of our work, his doctor was amazed because his inflammation was down and his blood showed C-reactive protein in blood decrease dramatically. It's an inflammatory biomarker. And the most amazing for me was he came to me during his last session, and his gray hair was black. And I asked him, did you color your hair? You look so young. And he told no. He naturally grew black hair in his scalp. And for me, it was astonishing.
Those are truly transformational results. I mean, just from working with the genetic traumatic imprints and really helping the body, integrate our, and I guess maybe that's a question, is the goal to remove the genetic traumatic imprint, or what is the goal of really working with those? Because obviously it changes the physiological environment of the body, but when you think about the genetic traumatic imprint, are you removing it in part of your sessions?
I cannot prove it. I'm not a scientist. I don't have my own lab. It's what I observed working with clients. Their patterns shifted permanently. And I believe what I do, and I will explain what I do, it changes genes expression. And it resolves genetic trauma, what I believe. Because the triggers are the same in the environment, and people do not create the same physiological stress reactions. And what I will explain what I do, I observe people's patterns, how they look. And what I'm looking for, like how muscles are in their face, what creates posture, breathing, and even their voice. Because there can be constrictions in muscles. Some psychologists call it neuromuscular locks that can be created as a result of the unconscious programs and genetic trauma imprints and other trauma imprints. And also I am observing, listening to verbal patterns when people communicate and non-verbal. And also I'm assessing the quality of voice. And I do it because there can be constrictions in muscles that create breathing and voice production. And I will hear it in voice. And also I look at people's drawings. And it's interesting. I ask a person to think about the issue and express mechanically without thinking about what to draw on a piece of paper. And the unconscious mind is expressing, guiding their hand and fingers, expressing a lot of unconscious information about these issues and patterns. And looking at the drawing, people are experiencing all familiar physical, emotional, mental symptoms.
Yeah. I actually, if we're willing, I'll share, to the audience that you were so gracious in allowing me to go through one of those sessions. And, I think it was really profound to allow the body to speak about what, was kind of going on. And, even in just one session, I wish I had the images here, but it was profound about what happened with the kind of integration of that imprint and how the visual representation in that drawing from the first one to the second one was completely different, right? And it kind of shows, at least to me, in what we were doing in our session, it showed how the body was kind of reframing around some of that trauma that was maybe there, which I think, if we think about that then China kind of resets that set point, how the body's triggered, which I think, when we talk about, the epigenetic and then the physiological kind of consequences or downstream effects from that, yeah, it can change reality in a way, right? Which I think is just such a beautiful opportunity for those that get involved with this work.
It's, first of all, it's so interesting that drawings can show the information even about genetic trauma imprints. And it can be even kind of glimpse of the information, what was it about, or symbolical or metaphorical information. And it's so interesting that a person's unconscious mind, it knows what imprints are, either their genetic trauma imprints and or womb trauma imprints or early childhood trauma imprints or all the above. And this information might come during the process I created to resolve trauma in these imprints. And it's so interesting. For some people, it was, as an example, I had a client who experienced during our session kind of recalling imprints, essence, and even images of his grandparents' experiences, and they were Holocaust survivors. And their trauma imprints created like horrible symptoms for this person, like hypervigilance to sounds, even to small sounds, and pretty much constant anxiety. And he had also some health issues like irritable bowel syndrome, and some like horrible symptoms of severe allergies. And as a result of working on this genetic trauma imprints for him. His irritable bowel syndromes were decreased significantly, and some other symptoms were gone completely.
It's amazing. I believe it's, I think it really our frontier in the next decade and, next couple of years really is a deep integration and awareness by, physicians and practitioners that are working to really help people achieve the true definition of longevity, right? It really does require that you go into somatic integration and like working with the unconscious mind and understanding all the different facets of what could be impacting health, which these genetic traumatic imprints are most certainly could be.
I would like to add, I told you about my client Lou, and what I was surprised about, very much so, that he could not see eye vision far clearly. After our work, he started to see clearly looking far. He did not need glasses to see far. And I believe that trauma can affect so many areas, including even vision and even hearing. I had another client, and she had a lot of genetic trauma imprints coming from her mother's side. And she had a hearing aids. She could not hear without it. And it was so amazing that as a result of this work, she did not need hearing aid anymore. She could hear herself. Because our vision and our hearing, it's connected to our brain, how our brain is translating this information.
Makes total sense. I mean, once you get into kind of the base filter of how your body's perceiving realities, there can be a lot of dramatic changes because it all kind of comes back to the nervous system in a lot of ways.
You mentioned before stress affecting longevity, and it's a lot of evidence now that chronic stress lead to aging rapidly through different mechanisms, and also it's leading to various of diseases.
That's true. And you would say, I mean, truthfully, when we start to, work with this domain of genetic traumatic imprints, would you also say that there's maybe the ability to remove the potential to then have your own self pass along those genetic traumatic imprints? Do you believe that's available to those that, do this work? Is that something that is accessible, that, hey, maybe that trauma won't be as severe in that next generation?
Or, William, I truly believe so. Because, again, I cannot prove scientifically, maybe in the future some scientists will prove. When trauma is resolved, even that information, for example, in the small RNA molecules, I believe on epigenetic level, I believe that offspring and even grandchildren and trauma can pass through multiple generations. Now the evidence shows. And I believe it won't be the same information when triggers around are the same that created the traumatic experience. And I believe when adults work on these unconscious programs and imprints, they won't pass to their offspring the same inherited information. I believe very strongly.
I would agree. I mean, I think this is, why, especially if somebody's looking to have a child, why taking care of your health, both physically, and really supporting the nutrient layers of the body and the physiological layers of the body, but talking about the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the genetic traumatic imprint layers, right? If you can really work to achieve and really support the fullest expression of your health in that moment upon conception of your child, I mean, imagine the profound implications that has for now your offspring, right? I think that's just...
And William, you mentioned today before that for humans, it can be similar mechanisms for transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. And there are some studies, for example, you mentioned Dutch hunger winter studies when people were starving in Holland during the Second World War. And the study showed that their children, they had cardiovascular diseases and also obesity and diabetes. And there are some studies about Holocaust survivors and their children. They have depression, anxiety, PTSD that can lead to some health conditions.
Yeah, it's one of those questions, I think, and maybe for our audience, and something even, I was even playing with in preparation for our session today was, I was, going through a simple yoga class. Is something that I do quite frequently. And I was remembering there was this acute stress that kind of came up in the session. And I was like, where is this coming from? Because nothing has actually changed. And I was actually, kind of reflecting on how perhaps that heightened heart rate and the, nervous system trigger, it felt like it was something that was generational rather than it was something that was like presenting in this present moment, if that makes any sense. Just kind of that awareness.
Yeah. Was it during the yoga class?
It was, and it was actually, during a very long hold, right? So where there's this acute stress and there's this intense activation, and the goal in a lot of ways is to allow the body to have that activation and not necessarily get lost in it, right? And I could find my body like having this intense kind of frustration and aggravation, and it wasn't because of the physical exhaustion, right? It was emotional, and it was almost it felt subconscious in a way, right? Which to me, I kind of smiled to myself, and as I accepted that there was this trigger, essentially the stress completely dissipated, and I was back into just being present with the experience, if that makes sense, and it felt less intense.
I would like to ask you, William, did you experience in the past that it's often it's hard to completely calm your mind? There's still thinking or rumination, kind of reliving experiences.
Oh my, my mind loves to tell stories all the time. I think that's just a facet to it. So yes, I would say there's this ability to continually generate a story. And, I think part of the journey in my own health is being able to kind of take space from that process, which is a cognitive process, and allow that to not necessarily entrain my physiology, right? Because I think the mind can, as we've talked, it can condition the body, it can condition the genetic patterns in the body. And so, if we can not necessarily let the mind control the physiological realm, we can kind of, I think health can be more easily achieved personally.
Actually, William, what you're explaining can be as a result of some imprints, and often genetic trauma imprints, because what the information came to me and some of my clients working on trauma, for some people, it was created a state of constant busyness in their mind in order to cope. For example, some kind of a sense of a lot of going on, or a sense of chaos, in order to survive in that moment, in order not to feel mentally, emotionally, physical, that pain what ancestors were going through. And when people with such genetic trauma imprints, they try to calm their mind, the symptoms might come of certain imprints. When the mind is calm, they're more aware of what's going on the unconscious level. Does it make sense?
It makes total sense. I mean, that's the real experience that I've had personally, so I can affirm that on our session here today. And I guess, given, we do have a lot of clinicians that are probably listening into that, are there some, obviously through our discussion, it's prevalent that almost everybody has these genetic traumatic imprints, but is there any type of indications that, hey, this genetic traumatic imprint or that subconscious programming, that is kind of maybe a main governing factor as to why the body or the individual is not able to change or able to integrate healthier strategies? Is there something that kind of cues you that, hey, maybe it's going to be really beneficial to look at that genetic traumatic imprint layer?
What I believe, the patterns what trauma imprints genetic womb and childhood can create, they are consistent. As I mentioned before, it's very hard to change these patterns consciously. Of course, there are some very powerful methods, for example, in cognitive behavioral therapy, to cope with certain symptoms, very powerful. And what I observed as a result of genetic trauma imprints and also early childhood trauma imprints, there can be similar patterns of kind of overreacting. For some people, they are overreacting to something that is not big. I had a client and she constantly was creating a reaction like it's the end of the world. The symptoms following that reaction. And also it's people are reacting with freeze or flight or fight responses to something that is not dangerous. They can be at their office and having these symptoms. Even the situation is not dangerous, but it is perceived as being dangerous because of these trauma imprints. And also when people feel resistance, and also people feel avoidance, it's all signs of these trauma imprints. Like people are procrastinating, avoiding doing something because of this.
Yeah, makes total sense. It's kind of the walls that we are ourselves putting up, right? Could be a sign that, hey, there is something in our subconscious and, our past that, even not our, lived past, but our, an ancestral past that is, coming up that's creating that block. And, we all have the opportunity to maybe encounter that and integrate that. I think that's the most beautiful thing about the work that you're doing. And, given that we are a nutrition company, how does working with nutrition potentially help, perhaps maybe support the body in working with these genetic traumatic imprints, in your opinion?
William, even I studied in medical school clinical nutrition. I do not do it in my practice. I'm not an expert in that area. I do only this methodology that I created. Only my personal belief is some supplements can truly help to release stress and also to sleep better. Because I observed it among some of my friends and clients that supplements can be very, very helpful to cope and to become more resilient during stressful life situations.
Yeah. I'm sure, if we think of the neurocognitive levels and allowing the body to more have accessibility to understanding those imprints, I think, I'm a believer that when the body is well nourished, it allows you to maybe come into more close contact with those traumatic experiences or imprints, and help to maybe become more aware of that too. That's kind of what I've seen, and hopefully a lot of practitioners and physicians would resonate with that as well. I mean, we're big believers here at Premier about that. So, is there any, words of wisdom, thoughts that you really want our audience to know about these genetic traumatic imprints that we haven't covered on our session today?
We did not cover that chronic stress, and chronic stress can be created by self-perception. For example, some people have low self-esteem, and it will be all day long feeling insecurity and stress being around people, and also perceiving the world because of some genetic trauma imprints as being dangerous and inability to cope. And also emotions like sadness, anger, anxiety can lead to chronic stress, and chronic stress leads to low-grade systemic inflammation. And low-grade systemic inflammation can even shorten telomeres, and it is creating a mechanism inflammation, that these two mechanisms, telomere attrition and inflammation, they lead to more rapid aging, for biological age, rapidly age.
Yeah, and so when we're talking about longevity and some key factors as to why you might have accelerated aging, when we're looking at those genetic traumatic imprints, they could be almost kind of fanning the fires of the body, accelerating that aging process, looking at telomerogenic attrition, or even going into that inflammatory aging process, because the body is in this hyper activation, hyper stimulated kind of feedback loop that could be, propelled forward because of those genetic traumatic imprints. Essentially, is that correct?
And both these mechanisms can lead to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer, Parkinson, cardiovascular conditions. Not only because not only it can it leads to faster rapid aging, but also to the serious health conditions.
So with that all being said, because I think it's a at this point, I'm sure our audience is like, how can I start understanding these genetic traumatic imprints that are maybe within myself or in my clients? How can they get involved with your work, and how can they, get involved in their own genetic traumatic imprints?
It's what I created for now. It's impossible to do it for yourself. There are some powerful techniques that can release stress. And if somebody is interested in my help, you can go to my website, drolgastevko.com. It's an abbreviation DR and my first name, Olga.com. And you can read more information, watch some videos. And the results of this work can be so dramatic, like again, the imprints are affecting many areas of life. And as one of the example, it can change even somebody's voice dramatically and permanently without doing any exercises. It can change how you are around people, talking, presenting your performance, and like again, health, reverse aging sign, and much more.
It's profound, yeah. I mean, it is going back to the beginning points of our conversation around how the subconscious and those subconscious layers, and just really in general, how we're always constructing our reality at one given time. And, that might not be the reality that's actually right in front of us, right?
That's why it's a distorted perception of unfiltered reality, and it can lead to acute stress and chronic stress and create these issues that I mentioned.
So what do you, kind of a closing question here, but what do you believe, or what would you like to see in regards to, the world and maybe our viewers even, incorporating or understanding genetic traumatic imprints? What do you think is going to happen in the next couple of years around this topic?
I believe that people need to come together in order to understand it fully. People in neuroscience and neurobiology and medical doctors and psychologists and people in the science of genetics, they need to come together and look at different angles from their points and listen to other people's points in order to have a bigger picture about that.
That's true. Yeah, I think there's a lot of great minds, and a lot of great minds are listening to this conversation right now. And so if we could get everybody in a room and really have a better understanding of all the different pieces of health, and I just believe, I think we're on the cusp of like truly transforming the narrative of what health is, and really understanding that and defining that, and allowing people to define that themselves, which I think is one of the most beautiful things about just the health journey in its own right. So
I believe that working on genetic trauma imprints and women, early childhood trauma imprints, it can be a part of helping people in medicine and even psychology in the future.
I couldn't agree more with you in that statement, Dr. Olga. And I do just want to say thank you so much for being a visionary, a steward, a thought leader, and really helping change the narrative of how we can optimize longevity and health potential through the work that you're doing. It's an honor to meet you and an honor to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much, William. It's so great to be on your podcast and share this information.
Well, I know we'll have show notes for people that are looking to get involved with your work. I know you relayed your website here on the show today, but again, for all those listening, I do just want to say thank you for being stewards of health and helping to push a more truer and fuller and more resonant definition of health forward. Our Premier Living podcast and everything we do here at Premier Research Labs is really based in that mission. So, Dr. Olga, thank you again for your time. And for those listening in, and we'll look forward to joining you next time on our Premier Living podcast.